Hello and welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Today my guest is Jay Baer, author, speaker, and founder of the consultancy Convince and Convert. Jay is the author of 6 books, including Utility and Hug Your Haters. He's back on the show to talk about his newest book, which is Talk Triggers, the complete guide to creating customers with word of mouth. Jay is actually a 7th-generation entrepreneur. He started 5 multi-million-dollar companies, and he's really just a pleasure to talk with. I know you're going to enjoy this episode. Let's get to it. Jay, it is so cool having you on the Modern Customer Podcast again to talk about Talk Triggers. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, my friend. We're going to find ourselves some modern customers.
All right. Awesome. And I actually speaking of, I did get your book in the mail. Thank you for that. Talk Triggers is Jay's new book. And I love how in the back, you actually have reviews from real readers, real customers. I thought that was a really unique thing.
Thanks. Yeah, we thought, Daniel Lemon and I, our co-author, were like, look, we got to do this a little different, right? It's a book about word of mouth. We can't just follow the paint by numbers business book formula. And the whole premise of the book, of course, is that the best way to grow any business is for your customers to grow it for you. Now, certainly working with influencers and what have you is a part of that equation. But if you can't get your actual run-of-the-mill customers, your modern customers, if you will, to talk about your business, well, then what's the point of being in business? And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to, instead of having people like you blurb the book on the back, if we just got real people? So we found some folks who had heard Daniel and I give talks on the book and said, hey, would you like a book early? We'll send you a galley copy if you promise to give us a little blurb honestly. And several people raised their hand. And so they're just real business owners.
I think that's really in the spirit of the book, and it's really cool. Let's actually start at the beginning. I really like this book because I think so many companies still don't do customer experience well, and that's why they're probably not getting this viral customer tornado that they want when things actually go well. Let's actually start by talking about the inspiration for the book. What was it that motivated you to put all this down on paper?
It's the same inspiration that I always have for books, which is I feel like I'm fortunate that I have a consulting firm so that we do this kind of work every day. And it exposes me to what business leaders and marketers and CX pros are thinking on a regular basis. So what sort of spawned this book was a number of our clients were asking us questions and saying, well, we kind of understand the mechanics of social media now, or the mechanics of content marketing, or the mechanics of CX, but we're not really sure exactly what we should be doing or saying. And we're like, wow, if these companies who are some of the most iconic brands in the world don't really understand the messaging part, then nobody understands the messaging part. And so I kind of started to pull the thread on that sweater a little bit and realized that we are totally taking word of mouth for granted, that word of mouth is the most important part of business that nobody actually spends any time on. And it's a shame. It's actually misplaced and ridiculous. So Daniel and I decided to really go down that rabbit hole, write this book. We've done a lot of consulting on word of mouth over the last couple of years. And so we essentially took the same process that we developed for the company for our clients and just gave it away in book form.
Yeah. So firstly, what struck me about this book was just this customer experience issue you write about, that marketers really don't talk to consumers. And I really want to pull on this sweater thread, if you will, with you. So why don't marketers talk to consumers?
All right, let me tell you a little story. When I'm much, 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 much older than you, as anybody who's looked at these show notes will attest to. However, when I was just a boy, my very first job, I was an intern at an agency in Phoenix called Nelson, Ralston, Robb. And my boss there told me in my first week, no good marketing happens at your desk. See, today, managers are like, how come you're not at your desk? What are you doing? How come you're not at your desk? What are you screwing around? Are you having a long lunch? My boss in those days didn't want us in the office. His philosophy was, you need to be out there talking to our clients or talking to the customers of our clients. That's how you understand what people want and how people think. And only then can you develop good marketing and strong CX. somewhere along the way, we lost that spirit. And I think, Blake, that I think the culprit is actually data, is technology. Because when I started in this business, we couldn't press a button and numbers would spit out. Like none of that existed. Now you can say, well, run me this report, run me that report. Let's look at our big data. Let's triangulate. Let's do some segmentation studies. Let's do A/B tests or whatever. And we didn't have any of that. We basically had conversations. That was our research. And I still feel like that's the best way to get at it, which is why some of the recommendations we make in this book are to know your customers better and to actually talk to your customers in a way that you're probably not today.
One of the examples in the book talks about the Cheesecake Factory, and you shared how
What?
Cheesecake
Factory. Woo, woo, woo.
Yeah, I was reading your book and thinking to myself, all my friends and family, they all love the Cheesecake Factory. they all walk away like pretty happy with that experience. So when I read your book, all of that rang true to me. And you talk about how the menu is their secret sauce, and I'll let you share the story with our listeners. But let's talk about Cheesecake Factory and what they do right.
It's a good example of a talk trigger. And a talk trigger is just this. It's a strategic operational choice that you make in your business that compels conversation. It's something that you do differently that people talk about. It essentially is an element of your CX designed to spur conversation. In their case, it's the fact that the cheesecake menu is expansive, to say the least. I had my intern permanently borrow a Cheesecake Factory menu. I'm actually looking at it right now, and had her count the words, which is not a great job. 5,940 words.
Oh my God.
Which is like 13% of the book that I wrote about word of mouth. They make chicken 85 different ways. 85, which is absurd. Like that's too many. They'll make chicken out of anything, frankly. But this is also as an aside, I would estimate the worst place ever to be a waiter. Because you're like, hey, are you guys ready to order? Like, no, we are totally not ready to order. You should go on break and get back to us. The menu is so big that if you look in social, we did a lot of social listening studies for this book. You see tweet after tweet after tweet, Facebook, Instagram, all these different posts about how giant the menu is. It is the thing that people talk about. And we knew that to be true anecdotally by looking at social conversations, but we wanted to put math around it. And like all the books that I've written, we have a lot of proprietary first-party research invested in this book. And in this case, we talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Cheesecake Factory customers, and found that 38% of them have, without being asked or aided, mentioned the size of the menu to somebody else in the last month or so, which is a tremendous, tremendous wave of recommendations and referrals and awareness where their current customers become volunteer marketers. And it's only because of this one CX decision that they've made to have a giant menu.
It's funny because if you are meeting someone that you don't know that well, it is an easy conversation starter. Like, look at this crazy menu with 5,000 words. What are we even going to order? It kind of makes the interaction easier.
There's no short lunch, I'll tell you that. If you're like, hey, let's just pop into the Cheesecake Factory for a quick lunch, that doesn't happen. There is no pop in, because by the time the usual pop in window has concluded, you are just deciding your salad.
Yeah, and if there is an hour where I'd like to spend my time during the day, it would be a factory of cheesecake. I mean, even the name is like, are you kidding me? I want to sleep on a bed of cheesecake in this factory.
They make like 33 kinds of cheesecake too, which is another sort of random fact. I mean, it's, like things you didn't even know could be made into a cheesecake. They make a cheesecake out of.
Oh my gosh, this is making me hungry, Jay. I want some cheesecake and coffee right now.
We do have a lot of food examples in the book. That wasn't necessarily intentional. It just sort of worked out that way. And I would say that restaurants categorically are perhaps slightly farther along in the creation and adoption of this kind of word of mouth than other categories. And they should be, because it's so competitive.
Right, because then you have those gooey cookies from DoubleTree by Hilton, which you sent me. Thank you for that. I love this. I love this so much. I think it's such a small little gesture that DoubleTree has done. Tell our listeners about the DoubleTree cookie, if you don't mind, and why it's
one of the all-time. Yeah, it's one of the all-time best talk triggers, really. I think the Cheesecake Factory is an example of sort of a terrific talk trigger, but perhaps the longest talk trigger ever that I'm familiar with is DoubleTree Hotels by Hilton. They've been giving out the warm chocolate chip cookie to every guest at check-in every day now, Blake, for 30 years. 30 years, if you can believe that. It's crazy, right? And I think anybody who travels or has been to DoubleTree remembers that cookie. It's very signature. But what's fascinating about it, a couple of things. One, we surveyed their customers as well and found that 34% of them have talked about the cookie in the last 30 days. And I'll tell you a companion question. When's the last time you saw an ad for Cheesecake Factory or DoubleTree?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Probably, yeah, right? Because the size of the menu and the cookie kind of are their ads, and their guests are their marketing department. I'm sure you've heard this saying, and it's not entirely true, but it's true enough. It goes like this: advertising is a tax paid by the unremarkable.
Ooh, that's really smart. Yeah.
And I think there's, it's not entirely true, right? But it is true enough. And DoubleTree is a good example of this, right? They don't spend a lot of money on advertising because their customer experience does that for them. But what's fascinating is it's not about like having the nicest, shower or the best gym or whatever. It's just a cookie, right? But it's so iconic to their brand. The reason it works so well for them is that it is relevant, which is one of the 4 requirements of a talk trigger that we discuss in the book. So there's 14 brands in the Hilton portfolio. Okay, DoubleTree is just one of them. Each of those brands, Hilton Garden Inn, blah, 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 has their own brand positioning, right? DoubleTree's is the warm welcome. So what they want to do is own the CX between the second you walk into the hotel and the second you walk into your room. So that's a, 8-minute gap typically. They want that to be really, really great. So they put a lot of money into lobby design. They train their front desk staff more so than many other brands. The tentpole of this is the cookie ceremony. And it really is a ceremony, right? It's not just a pile of cookies on a desk. Your desk clerk turns around, goes into an oven, gets a warm chocolate chip cookie, puts it in a paper bag, turns around, and then hands it to you. They always hand it to you like a Japanese tea ceremony or something. Warm cookie, the warm welcome. It all fits together. It's very relevant and on brand, which is why it works so well. Well,
Jay, you talked about the 4 triggers or your formula. Could you share the other 3 with us?
Yeah. So the book itself is set up in what we call the 4-5-6 structure. So it's the 4 requirements, the 4 things that your talk trigger must contain, the 5 different types of talk triggers, and then the 6-step process for how to create and test and measure a talk trigger. So 4, 5, 6. The 4 requirements are: it must be remarkable, kind of table stakes, right? If what we're talking about here is creating conversations, your talk trigger has to be noticeable enough for those conversations to be catalyzed. And that sounds self-evident, but so many businesses don't do it. And here's why. We have in business, and partially CX is responsible for this, unfortunately, fooled ourselves into thinking that competency creates conversations. That if you are a good business, people will talk about you. But that doesn't really happen, not in the real world. Like, I don't know everybody listening. I'm sure I know some of your listeners, but I know this for sure. Nobody has ever said, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's not a good story, right? This is all about telling stories. All a talk trigger is a story that you give your customers to tell. And nobody tells this story like, yeah, I went to a hotel and the bed was comfortable. Neat. That's nifty. It's just not a good story, right? So that's the first thing. It has to be remarkable. Second thing, it has to be relevant, as I just talked about with DoubleTree, right? Warm welcome, warm cookie, it all makes sense. Third, it has to be reasonable. So this is a little bit counterintuitive, but you don't want your talk trigger to be super big and bold and crazy because it actually creates suspicion. And you see this all the time. Marketers in particular are guilty of this. They're like, well, hey, man, it's hard to get attention these days. We got to break through. So what we're going to do is have a contest, and one of these guys is going to win an island.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, what? You know what I mean? You're like, wait, what are you talking about? Right? It's just like, it's too crazy, and people don't believe it. And so it doesn't create conversations because you don't want to tell your friends something that you think might be bogus. So it actually kills word of mouth. And the fourth thing it has to be is repeatable. This one's super important. We are not in this book discussing viral marketing. We are not talking about surprise and delight, right? Where you take one customer and you treat them manifestly different than all the other customers. This is where CX and marketing get together and their worst impulses take root. Let's take one customer in this hotel at the DoubleTree, and instead of giving everybody a cookie, let's take one guy once a month, and he checks into his room, and there's a live panda bear on the bed with a eucalyptus tree, right? And the hope is that he's gonna like put it on Instagram, and then it's gonna go on Reddit, and then it's gonna go on MSNBC or whatever, and that might work, but it probably won't work. And even if it does, you get a week's worth of chatter, and then you're left with nothing but panda shit in your hotel room. I would much rather have a strategy that pays off every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, instead of buying a lottery ticket, which is what surprise and delight is. It's hope. It's a strategy that is rooted entirely in hope, and that's not really a strategy at all. So the better approach, in my estimation, is that every customer has access to your talk trigger. It's universal. And the CX is set up so that everybody gets it. Everybody has the same menu at Cheesecake Factory. Everybody gets a cookie at DoubleTree. It's not just certain people. It's not just if you're in the honors program, everybody gets a cookie. So I just think it's a better way to go.
So Jay, as you're talking, I'm thinking about identity, because all of these brands have an identity. They have a narrative or a story. I love this DoubleTree that in the 8 minutes, I can imagine that. They get the cookie, the lobby is well designed. So they're all about that onboarding and orientation. How does a company identify who they are? Who is their identity, and what is that talk trigger for them uniquely?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes they don't know, right? Sometimes they just don't know what their thing is. And it's partially because over the last, I don't know, I'm going to say 25 years in business, we have come to adopt this follow the leader mentality that's driven by best practices and the free flow of information, and everybody has the same case studies and access to the same ideas now in ways that before the internet we really didn't. So now everybody knows the Zappos story, everybody knows the Amazon story, everybody knows the Apple story, or whatever kind of trope you want to trot out there. And so what people do now is they say, well, who's the leading company in our category? Let's try and do it the way they do it. And I understand that intellectually, but same is lame. From a word of mouth standpoint, same as lame. Saying we're going to do it like everybody else means, by definition, no one's going to talk about you. It's just not going to happen, right? Because the customers have seen it all before. So what we recommend, especially if you don't really know what your shtick is to actually go through the talk triggers process, and it will help you figure that out. So the best way to, let me say it this way. Here's the worst way to create a talk trigger. Get everybody in a conference room and brainstorm it. Yeah. Which is unfortunately the way everybody tries to do it. And if it was that easy, you'd already have a talk trigger. The best way is to first identify your customer journey map. So what are all the inflection points, intersection points you have with customers? Second, interview 3 groups of customers. You interview, this is the exact same process that we use in my company. You interview new customers, you interview longtime customers, and you interview lost customers. 5 or 6 of each is sufficient. And in each of those conversations, what you're looking for, Blake, is to say, at each of these touch points, what did you expect would happen? Because you're trying to map customer expectations on top of customer journey. And the reason that's so powerful is that if I know what my customers expect, I, by definition, know what they do not expect. And that gap between what they expect and what they don't expect, that's where the gold is. That's where the talk trigger is. Because again, unexpected is what creates conversation, not expected. So that's the right way to get at it. And a lot of times when you go through that process, when you hear it over and over, what people expect and then what they might not expect, your own sort of brand positioning can actually sort of emerge out of the clouds, and you can actually get a lot more benefit out of this project than even a talk trigger. It can really help you with your overall, like, how do we see the world?
Yeah, that sounds really smart. So you're basically telling readers to get customer feedback from people who love you, people who are new to you, and then people that you've lost that don't love you anymore. That sounds like a really rational starting point. Why is this so hard? But
really structured, though. But really structured, not just like, what do you think of us? It's more, what did you think would happen when we sent you our proposal? Because it's not about. Let me back up a step and say this, and I think I wouldn't usually say this, but for you and your audience, I will. Most CX today is about retention. Talk triggers helps you use CX for acquisition. And the way that happens is to understand what your customers see coming. And of course, to do that, because you don't want to disappoint them. But what can you do that they don't see coming? Because that's what creates conversations, and conversations creates new customers.
So what can you do, all of you listening out there, what can you provide that your customers aren't expecting? Is that right?
Yeah, that's it, that they don't see coming. Because if I'll give you an example of what happens when the world changes around you. So Enterprise Rent-A-Car had a talk trigger for 20 years. It was, we'll pick you up. We'll pick you up. That was their positioning. That was their brand. That was their slogan. It was in every commercial. Enterprise Rent-A-Car was the only company that would pick you up, that would bring the car to you, would take you back home after you dropped off the car, whatever. That was a great talk trigger. Until Uber. Now, in this age, why would I need the rental car dude to pick me up? I can get anybody to pick me up in one click. So sometimes the world changes around you, and your sort of talk trigger positioning is no longer valid.
So when you have a company that you're advising and they want to do this talk trigger thing, who would you tell them to get involved? Is it the CMO?
My favorite question. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, look, here's the reality. Most of these projects are led by marketing, which makes sense.
Right.
But it is by no means a marketing-only process. Daniel and I in the book call it the triangle of awesome. The triangle of awesome includes marketing, sales, and service, with CX in the middle. Because as we talked about, marketing doesn't actually know what customers want. They think they do, but they totally don't. Because marketing never talks to customers, ever.
Right.
The people who talk to customers are sales and service, which is why they totally have to be part of this. And CX, of course, is CX, so they need to be part of this as well. And what's great about talk triggers, and why I love doing this consulting, is because it is an operational choice. It's an operational choice that creates marketing advantages. But a talk trigger is not marketing. It's not a product. It's not a price. It's not a promotion. It's not a coupon. It's not a contest. It's not a campaign. It's something that you choose to do every single day. Giving everybody a warm chocolate chip cookie isn't a marketing decision. It's an ops decision. It's a CX decision that helps you in marketing. So to answer your question, yes, the CMO has to be involved, but also the CCXO and the VP sales and the chief customer service officer, or what, everybody has to be involved. It takes a village to create conversations.
That's amazing, Jay, because I really feel like these are people who often are not all in the room together talking about customer experience.
Never. And you know why? Because when you say we're going to have a meeting about customer experience, everybody calls in sick except the CX professional.
Oh my gosh. That's depressing.
Because they think it's true. Nobody thinks CX is interesting except for people who work in CX. Trust me. This is the case. But if you say, hey, we're going to do an initiative to be better at word of mouth marketing so our customers become volunteer marketers, and we're going to do something interesting and novel to make that true. Don't you want to be a part of that? That's a meeting people accept on their calendar. So one of the best ways to work on CX is to stop calling it CX.
Okay, what are we going to call it then?
Well, we call it talk triggers. We wrote a whole book about it.
That's amazing. So in a way, some of these folks need to get better at pitching their colleagues on becoming more involved in customer experience and then masking what it actually is.
Oh my God. I did a whole speech on this at Oracle's event this year. And my whole presentation was about the problem with CX is that CX is really bad at marketing CX inside the organization.
Yeah.
Like CX is about marketing the necessity of CX, and it's all about internal sales essentially. And most CX professionals need to get better at that.
Yeah, it's really hard because you often get beaten down. I used to work at a big company, and I mean, honestly, I would get in trouble because people didn't like me because I ruffled feathers, and they're like, "Who's this girl?" It was hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
And then I left.
It is hard. Yeah.
So, well, what is the one piece of advice you would give our listeners who really would like to get on board with this talk triggers thing? Aside from buying your book, you know, what one piece of advice would you give them?
I think the most important piece of it, because everything stems from this is sort of the seed corn of this approach, is to make it a point to understand customers better, right? To spend more time with customers. I'll tell you this, if you as a professional said, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to have 3 telephone conversations with customers every week. Within a quarter, you would be massively better at your job.
Yeah, Jay. You know, I recently gave a speech a few months ago, and some of the, to be frank, like some people didn't like it at all. And it was so painful to read their feedback. But I read it and I worked really hard on my next few speeches, and then those went really, really well. But I could imagine for companies, it's the same. It's like, it's really hard to look at raw feedback and not be down about it, but really just work hard to improve it and see the opportunity of what is possible.
Yeah, I mean, it is the root of all of it. As you know, we're doing a project with Comcast right now, and they just completed this week their 1 millionth customer callback so far in 2018. Now, this is not customers calling in. This is managers, and not just customer service managers. This is managers. Their rule is every manager in the company, regardless if you're the manager of like paper towels, it doesn't matter. Like every manager in the company has to call customers every week, just like I talked about. They've done 1 million of those calls already this year. That's crazy.
Yeah, Comcast is amazing. I know that I think they all had to listen to that call with Ryan Block. And I was recently talking with some people from Comcast, and they said that period was so painful because everyone had to be educated and had to hear the negative stuff. But I know that they've worked really, really hard on doing better. And I know the numbers, they've done like almost 1 million social customer service interactions, and they're working really hard to grow their customer experience.
Yeah, it's coming around. It really is pretty exciting to see what they're up to, for sure.
So, Jay, as far as talk triggers, I mean, are we going to start a movement with talk triggers? What is your goal with the book? What would you like to see when this book is in the hands of decision makers out there?
I mean, here's the thing. Every business should care about word of mouth more than they do. It is the most cost-effective and effective way of creating new customers. We've sort of taken a nap on the premise of word of mouth in the last few years, and I think we need to awake from that nap. So I would love people to say, we need to do this. What I want is, and it's already happening just in the short time the book's been out, what I want is people to say, we put this into practice. We came up with a differentiator for our business, and here it is, and here's ours, and here's ours, and here's ours, and here's ours. Because frankly, there is, other than your own kind of inertia or politics or whatever, which I can partially solve, and we talk about it a lot in the book, but I can't entirely solve it, there is literally no reason to not do this. But this requires nothing other than want to. So what I hope is that people actually put it into practice. That would make me really happy. And that's frankly why the book is so prescriptive, right? It's like, here's exactly how to do it. It's not a book that says word of mouth is important, right? It does say that, but then it says, and here's exactly how to do it. So there's really no excuse at this point.
So Jay, in closing, I would just like you to leave us with some inspirational message from your book that gives us all hope that we can actually improve customer experience, even if we work at a company that, where people don't really value it.
A couple things. One, if you go to talktriggers.com, there is a tremendous amount of free stuff there. There's discussion guides. There's PowerPoint presentations so you can pitch this to your boss. There are infographics. There are videos. There are all kinds of supplemental research so you can prove that this works to your boss. There's like tons of free stuff. So would love for you to buy the book. But even if you don't, if you go to talktriggers.com, there's so much stuff there and we're just giving it away. So enjoy. I will also tell you that the book Talk Triggers has its own talk trigger, which makes sense. It would be weird if it didn't. That would be kind of hypocritical. And it works like this. If you buy the book and you don't like it, you go to the website, leave us a note, and we will buy you any other book that you like, period. You want Blake's book, great. You want a first edition Bible, we'll track one down. So there's literally no risk to buy this book because we have set it up so that it will cost you nothing if you don't like it. To your question, I will tell you this. The reason why people in companies don't gravitate towards CX is it's a little bit arcane, right? CX people tend to kind of be a little bit CXy, if you know what I mean, and make their work in some cases not quite as approachable as they might. They're not great at marketing their own work, as we talked about earlier. But the larger issue I touched on a few minutes ago, CX is typically viewed inside organizations as a mechanism for customer retention and churn reduction. You want to unlock attention in your business. You want to unlock a budget. You want to unlock the praise of a CMO. Say, guess what CX is for now? Customer acquisition. And that's what a talk trigger is. It takes an element of your CX and turns it into a customer acquisition vehicle. It becomes about sales, not service. And that's where people start getting interested. Because everybody in every company cares a lot more about making money than they do about saving money. And I know that because I wrote a whole book about it 2 years ago called Hug Your Haters.
Well, Jay, I'm really excited for you. I personally read this book and I found it really inspiring. And I think our listeners would be very lucky to have you speak at their company or get a copy of your book. So I will be providing some links to Jay's various websites in the show notes. And Jay, I just want to thank you so much for being on the Modern Customer Podcast with me.
Always a pleasure. Fantastic to talk to you. Congratulations on the great success. I love what you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you so much, Jay. That really means a lot to me. All of you, you've been listening to the Modern Customer Podcast. Please subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.